She was vomiting so violently, her heart just stopped. On the way to the hospital. Before she ever reached the ER doors. And what she says happened next. She wasn't scared. She was standing in a calm, white place watching people walk around her. Until she came face to face with someone she recognized. Clarence Clemons. The big man from Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band. He looked at her, and told her it wasn't her turn. She woke up a month later. Her family had already been told it was time to say goodbye. And when she finally found out what had happened to Clarence while she was gone, it changed everything she believed about what comes after. Stay with me because the story gets stranger the closer you look. The White Room and the Big Man, a near-death story, and what we actually know about the space between. A bad night that became a missing month. It started the way a lot of medical emergencies start, unglamorously. A woman was vomiting, badly enough and long enough that her electrolytes, the sodium, potassium, and other minerals that keep a heart beating in rhythm, spun out of balance. Electrolyte imbalances are not a footnote in this story, they're the engine of it. Severe imbalances, especially in potassium, are one of the more common triggers of sudden cardiac arrhythmias, and that's precisely what happened next. On the way to the hospital, her heart stopped. She coded the blunt hospital shorthand for cardiac arrest right there in transit, before the ER doors ever opened. What she describes next is the part of the story that millions of people who've been resuscitated from cardiac arrest describe in strikingly similar terms: a white, calm place. No fear. People walking. And then, unexpectedly, a familiar face: Clarence Clemons, the towering saxophonist known to generations of fans simply as the Big Man, the sound behind some of Bruce Springsteen's most iconic recordings. In her account, he looked sad, and he told her something simple and absolute: it wasn't her turn. She needed to go back. She woke up a month later. Her family had been told it was time to consider taking her off life support. They hadn't done it yet. The day after they were given that news, she opened her eyes. Her first sensation, she says, wasn't fear or confusion about the coma. It was the disorienting feeling that she'd simply been on a long train trip. There was no television in the ICU, no drip of daily headlines, so she had no way of knowing what had happened in the world while she was gone. When she was finally well enough to piece it together, her daughter told her, Clarence Clemons had died during the time she was unconscious. The detail that doesn't quite line up, and why that's interesting. Here's where a little research adds a layer the original telling doesn't mention: Clarence Clemons didn't die in 2016. He died on June 18, 2011, in West Palm Beach, Florida, 6 days after suffering a serious stroke, at age 69, after nearly 40 years alongside Springsteen and the E Street Band. If her cardiac arrest and month-long coma happened in 2016, the two events are 5 years apart, not simultaneous. That's not a gotcha. It's actually the more fascinating part of the story, for a specific reason. Coma and critical illness memory is notoriously unreliable, and a huge number of NDE and coma recovery accounts researchers have studied contain exactly this kind of true fact, wrong timestamp quality. The core experience: a calm white place, encountering someone who had died, a sense of being sent back tends to be recalled vividly and consistently over years. But the surrounding scaffolding of dates, sequence, and duration is frequently reconstructed afterward, stitched together from fragments, family accounts, and the brain's own effort to make a coherent story out of a period with no continuous memory. It's entirely possible the event happened in 2011 and the year has simply drifted in retelling, or that this is a second, separate hospitalization that echoed an earlier one. Either way, the emotional core of the account: grief, gratitude, a name that turned out to belong to someone real who had genuinely died, is the part that has stayed fixed. What happens in the brain during a cardiac arrest? For decades, near-death experiences were treated mostly as anecdote, moving, but outside the reach of science. That's changed substantially. Researchers now study cardiac arrest survivors specifically because cardiac arrest is one of the few situations where doctors can pinpoint, almost to the second, when the brain lost the oxygenated blood flow needed for normal consciousness, and yet patients still report structured, lucid, often life-altering experiences from that window. A few things researchers have found. The brain doesn't necessarily go dark immediately. Studies using EEG monitoring on dying and resuscitated patients have detected bursts of organized brain activity, including gamma wave activity associated with conscious awareness minutes after clinical cardiac arrest, well past the point doctors previously assumed consciousness was impossible. NDE accounts are strikingly consistent across cultures. A sense of peace, a bright or white light, an out-of-body perspective, meeting deceased people, and a feeling of being given a choice or being sent back are reported by patients across different countries, religions, and belief systems, which is part of why researchers take the phenomenon seriously even without agreeing on what causes it. The returning souls phenomenon is documented, not just anecdotal. Multi-hospital studies of cardiac arrest survivors, including a large international study coordinated out of NYU Langone, have specifically interviewed patients who were resuscitated after clinical death and cataloged recurring features like the ones described here: calm, absence of fear, a sense of watching rather than participating, and encounters with figures the patient perceived as guides. Explanations remain contested. Some researchers point to surges of certain brain chemicals, oxygen deprivation effects on the temporal lobe, or the brain's last, unusual bursts of electrical activity as physiological explanations. Others argue the current science can describe what the brain is doing without fully explaining the vividness, coherence, and life-changing nature of what people report. That gap between how and why it feels the way it does is exactly where the story lies. The real Clarence Clemons. Part of what makes this particular account resonate is that the figure at the center of it wasn't a stranger or an abstract being of light. It was someone with a very specific, very public life. Clemons was born in 1942 in Norfolk County, Virginia, and joined forces with a young, still struggling Bruce Springsteen in 1971 after walking into an Asbury Park bar on a stormy night, a meeting so dramatic in the retelling that Springsteen himself has said it's hard to separate the fact from the legend that grew up around it. From 1972 until his death, Clemons' saxophone was inseparable from the E Street Band's sound, driving songs like Born to Run, Thunder Road, Badlands, and the extended solo on Jungleland that many fans consider one of the greatest saxophone performances in rock history. By his final years, Clemons had been through multiple knee replacements and back surgery, sometimes performing marathon E Street Band concerts from a stool. When he suffered his stroke in June 2011, Springsteen posted a public message asking fans to hold a hopeful spirit, and later described visiting him in the hospital and playing guitar at his bedside, sensing that Clemons could still respond by squeezing his hand. Clemons died 6 days later, and Springsteen called their partnership one that let him tell a story far deeper than those simply contained in our music. New Jersey later declared Clemons' birthday, January 11th, an official state day in his honor. That's the man this woman says she met in that white, calm place, not chosen at random, but a real person whose death was mourned publicly, whose absence left a specific, well-documented hole in a band she may or may not have followed closely in life. Why this kind of story sticks with people? There's a reason accounts like this circulate widely, get retold, and stay in people's memory long after they read them. They sit at an unusually rich intersection: hard medical fact, an electrolyte crash, a cardiac arrest, a month on life support, unresolved scientific mystery. What, exactly, is happening in a resuscitated brain, and deeply personal meaning-making, a specific person, a specific message, a specific sense of permission to keep living. She herself lands on the most disarming possible conclusion, not a claim that she has proof of an afterlife, and not a retreat into pure skepticism either. Just this, that it gives her peace to think something happens after death, and that if nothing does, that would be all right too. That's a strikingly rare stance in a genre of story that usually pushes hard toward "I know what happens when we die." She doesn't claim certainty. She claims comfort, on either side of the question. The honest bottom line. Nobody, not neuroscientists, not cardiologists, not the survivors themselves, can currently say with certainty what near-death experiences are. What can be said is this: the physiological event, a cardiac arrest triggered by an electrolyte crisis, a month-long coma, a genuine and precarious brush with death, is medically ordinary in its mechanics and extraordinary in what she came back describing. The person she says she met was real, beloved, and did in fact die of a stroke-related complication just, based on the public record, in 2011 rather than 2016. And the experience left her not with fear of death, but with something closer to its opposite, a quiet, ongoing sense that she doesn't need to have the answer in order to feel okay. This is a sensitive topic involving cardiac arrest, coma, and end-of-life decisions. If you or someone you know is grappling with grief, a health crisis, or thoughts of self-harm, please reach out to a trusted professional or a crisis line in your area.